Good afternoon. This is the next session, and really excited and interested to hear this one. We're now being joined by Laura Goodwin of BBC Scotland, and I'm going to get your pronunciation of your surname way off, Amanda. Amanda Renteria of Code for America. Laura has been a broadcast journalist for 15 years, having worked across all media, and in 2018 joined the BBC as innovation correspondent, covering a wide range of stories celebrating the creativity and ingenuity of Scotland's business and academic community. A perfect person to interview Amanda. Amanda has a fascinating, unique and diverse background. Graduate of Harvard and Stanford, worked within the financial services industry, moved into education, and then into public service, and an American political aide, chief of operations at the California Department of Justice, named one of the most influential staffers, and has received many awards, including the first Latina chief of staff in the history of the US Senate. Amanda also finds time to serve on several non-profit boards. So if, like me, you're feeling like we should be doing a lot more, I'm with you there. I feel like I should really get my finger out. Anyway, Amanda joins us today as CEO of our American cousin, Code for America, and it's great to have with us Laura Goodwin and Amanda Renteria. Laura.
Thank you so much, Richard. And Amanda, thank you so much for joining us all the way from California. And our audience don't know, but you guys had a small earthquake last night, but you're here, you're joining us, and we thank you for taking the time. You have had the most extraordinary career, and I wonder if all those experiences have brought you perfectly to where you are now with Code for America. I wonder if you could tell us a bit about how Code for America started and how you came to be CEO.
Yeah, I'd love to. Well, thank you for having me here. You did a good job, Richard. It's either Renteria or Renteria, si quieres, in español. So it's really wonderful to be here. And we're used to earthquakes, so it was okay to start off this morning with a little bit of shaking. You know, it is a really interesting time in America. I have to say, even today, we'll have the address of President Biden talking about the first 100 days. And it's been, for folks who have been here and been in government for a while, there is a real true opening right now that feels very different than anything that I've seen in my lifetime. And in many ways, Code for America lines up right alongside that. And so let me start there in terms of just where we are today. But thinking back now 10 years was quite far away from this moment we're in right now. 10 years ago, government wasn't necessarily thinking about how do we deliver services in a new way. They weren't thinking about the social safety net in the way that everyone is today. And so we're coming at a time where when we first started, it was, how do you get technology into government? How do we start to get technologists who are really excited about being in the private sector start to think about the responsibility of government, start to think about their role and place in government? And then that evolved into having fellows. And so it was a quick stint for people to say, hey, take a time out of your company and maybe go and help the city or this county or the state to try and get their services modernized. And then it turned into now what is a much deeper level. Not only do we have a volunteer network of 85 different brigades, 25,000 different people that jump in to do civic tech projects on an ad hoc basis in a volunteer kind of way with mayors all across the country. But how do we also, as an organization, really think about changing systemic change within government, especially as it pertains to low-income families? Because as one might know, it's quite easy for government to do public-private partnerships when you are working in very mainstream programs, let's say. But when it comes to low income programs, oftentimes those are the ones that get put aside, or those are the ones that people haven't really spent a lot of time in. And so today, Code for America is doing two things. One, our volunteer network is extremely engaged, particularly during the pandemic, helping people get mutual aid early on, vaccines now. And then the other side of the work is a deeper level partnership on food assistance, cash assistance, and automatic record clearance, clearing people's records once they've served their time. And that work has been incredibly important right now because governments all across really this world have begun to see we've got to do things in a different way. We've got to be flexible, nimble. We've got to see all people in an equitable way. And technology is a really lever for being able to do that. And so for me, someone who grew up in small town, rural America, my parents were former farm workers, my dad from Mexico. I've seen government in a lot of different ways, but particularly as a place to make change at scale. And this is what we're doing today is we are trying to get food assistance out to kids as fast as we can. And we are trying to set a new way of how government thinks. And so I'm particularly excited because this is why I got into public service to begin with, which is how do you make sure that it can work for all people? And we're starting to see that opening to do so.
I really want to talk to you about engaging with government in just a minute, because you have kind of got both those hats. You can tell us about how these things work, but I kind of want to start at the very basics about how do you identify a problem and how do you bring in lived experience to tell you how to fix it?
Yeah, it's well, lived experience is and should shape just how you think about government services, because it's the one industry that truly has to serve everyone. And too often we see elected officials who aren't quite representative of the full diversity of really the people it serves. And so part of what we have been pushing at Code for America, particularly in these past recent years, is we've been putting fellows in who maybe have been incarcerated and now they come out and they're helping a city develop app programs or help a city to communicate to folks who are in reentry all the different services available, the different training programs that are in the area. Or another case is for food stamps. When we first started 10 years ago on figuring out why is it people aren't applying for food stamps, immediately we saw, well, for most of the population who was looking to get to food stamps, they had a cell phone, not a computer and a desktop. And most of the early applications required a desktop, by the way, that timed out in 30 minutes. And so just things like that, when you look back on that, anyone that had experienced that process would tell you, wait a second, you shouldn't be on a desktop, you should be on a phone. And by the way, this question is confusing, or this question makes me feel bad. One of the things that we often talk about is technology can either show up as, hi, how are you? Welcome, right? Or technology can show up as, who are you? And tell me who you are. And most of our services, in terms of really trying to reach out to low-income communities, they start out very skeptical from government. And so it's no surprise that what we were seeing on the back end of data once we started to get into these programs is how many people came into the program and then dropped off with question 1, question 2. And those are the kinds of things where technology can really make a big change, because for many folks in government, they might just not know that asking someone on hourly wages, what's your salary, is a confusing question, right? So it's both the tactical, but also the tone.
So can you tell us a bit about how Code for America really works in terms of the structure? I know that your volunteers are key, but how does the staffing model work, and how do you fund it?
Yeah, so most of our funding is through philanthropy, although that's changing over the course of 10 years, because what we've started to do, so we have our volunteer brigades that are out there doing projects. We really try and let our volunteer brigades understand what they need on the local ground and then do it, and then share best practices across our different brigades. As an example, when the state of Massachusetts was having trouble with vaccines, they built a program. And they started to talk to the folks in California. Here's what you guys can do. This is what we're learning in Boston. How about you doing it in California? And all of a sudden you start to see a lot more pop-ups from our volunteer programs helping seniors to be able to book appointments. That's our volunteer work. On our work that is really structured with government, we are actually sitting with government. We often say, we don't want to own this program. We want to help you deliver it better. And so we sit with them, we go. One of the things that Code for America talks about is making sure that whatever we are doing, whether it's in our volunteer site or whether we're sitting with government on food assistance program, is that it starts with really centering the people it serves, human-centered design, people-centered design, where we go out and we sit with families who are actually trying to get food stamps, right? Or who are sitting there trying to figure out how to get their tax refund. And we take that research and we start our design from that process. And then we sit with the folks in government right next to them, in their cubbies, and go, I see the paperwork that's piling up. I see why this question was asked, but could we ask it in a different way? And so I like to say our work generally has been bridge building, whether that is in the volunteer space with mayors and cities saying, hey, listen, this is what your community needs, and you might not be hearing it, and how can we help? Or it's bridge building, sitting with government saying, here's how you can use technology.
And how do those conversations go? Because I suppose you're kind of saying, you have a problem, this is how we think you can fix it. So, I mean, I imagine that your years in politics, diplomacy and how to manage that relationship becomes quite important.
It certainly is a dance, right? And it's certainly kind of going out for coffee and really doing it respectfully. What I will say is this is a big change since the pandemic. So we had run a bunch of different pilots all across the country on how do you have one intake form for all of your benefits. And 5 years ago, we were almost begging states to try it with us and saying it's free, we can bring tech help. Since the pandemic, or when the pandemic started, there was an influx of saying, hey, I know you guys are here. Can you now help us? How do we get to school kids? As an example, what happened during the pandemic is once school closed, major school closures all across the country, which meant for folks who are on school lunch programs, that is where families were fed. That is where our kids were fed. And so immediately we had to do this digitally. And states all across America were like, we don't know how to do this. We don't know how to find the kids. We don't know how to get them resources for groceries. What do you do? And a lot of that, particularly at the beginning, was the back end of being able to data match, simply saying social services, where are these folks? School district, where are these folks? How do we match that? And for many states, their first coding got to about 25% of school lunch kids. With just a couple of tweaks and sitting down, looking at the code, making some changes, we got to 85% in quite a few states across the country. And that really was an eye opener for a lot of governments, for a lot of social services saying, wait a second, maybe we do need to think about this tech differently. And so this part has really changed, and particularly in America, where you have a president now who has put out, we want to see poverty reduction for kids by 50%. Being able to not only have the systems that can actually reach those kids, but being able to also track it so you can feed back to government and say, this program worked, this kind of outreach worked. And so I got to say, it was a much harder charm effort 5 years ago. And today it really is a partnership.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting because not only are you working across, federal and state government, but you have had a change of administration in the midst of a pandemic. That's a lot of different levels to navigate. And do you see a distinct change now, would you say?
Absolutely. Simply the style and way of this administration, being able, again, putting out a goal like 50% child poverty reduction is a huge North Star for a lot of our partners in state government, but the administrators we work with as well. Because for many folks who ran our safety net programs or who ran child poverty programs, oftentimes they were sort of layered down. And what we are beginning to see is a real investment and a real awareness about what are you doing, how are you doing this, and how can we help? That's been a really big key change. The other piece is, people themselves during this pandemic have seen government failures for unemployment insurance, have seen government failures when they tried to go in and get food stamps or food assistance or do their tax refund and realize, wait a second, I used to go to an in-person site. Now what do I do? So all of that kind of change has not only changed people and how they see government, but the administration has really guided it in a direction to say we need government to work, and we are willing to open up and do it in a new way. And that piece is particularly important, especially because government is generally in their governance pretty risk averse. But you have now a North Star that's saying we can't stay the way we were. We need to do this in a different way. The other piece is, we work in low income programs, and to see both his empathetic style does change the way even we think of systems in how it interacts with low income communities and have that understanding of what people are going through. But the other aspect is the equitable outcomes piece, we've known for a long time that not only are low-income programs something that often gets overlooked, but within that, you have communities who have for a very long time have really been left out of the system. In fact, some of our lowest income communities are completely left out of the system. And right now is an opportunity where the government is saying, how do we do it differently? Because we know we are missing sectors, Black and Latinx populations. I want to see how that is different. And certainly the president's mandate to want to see that changes the kind of discussions that we have at the hyper-local level and at the state level.
Yeah, and that must be completely different in terms of them asking you how to do things differently, because, you know, often in large bureaucratic systems, we've always done things that way, so things don't change. How have you dealt with that in the past? How do you persuade a big organization, a government, to change tack?
You know, one of the things that I'll say this was a learning during the pandemic, which is when you're in a crisis, people just do what they need to do. And I think what we have learned over time is we do have to meet states where they are. And you can't just come in and tech and say, hey, we have this whiz bang thing, you know, and we think we can, you know, fit here. And at the beginning of the pandemic, we were sort of saying, you know, it's time to clean the data. And some folks are coming back to us and say, we just need the website to actually work so people know where to go. And immediately everyone went into action and did that. And now what we've seen is not only did that build a good amount of trust between folks, but what it did is it now has led to a moment where it's like, okay, now we need to work on that bigger projects because we built that trust, because you understand you're going to meet us where we are. But, you know, here's the thing is you have a lot of people who have dedicated themselves to public service for a really long time, right? And there is a fear that all of a sudden you look behind the curtain and you say, wait a second, why do you do that? Why do you do that? And so we've tried to resist that, you know, make sure that in public, even when we're talking about what states or what these public officials are doing or what these public administrators are doing, that we do it with a sense of grace, of understanding they too are working in old systems. And so that's part of what we try and really maintain is this relationship of saying, we really are here to help you. And at the end of the day, our goal is actually for government to adopt it, not for us to do it ourselves. We're not a vendor. We're a nonprofit looking to help you get to a new level. From the government side, you know, having worked at the California Department of Justice, I remember when the Attorney General, now the Secretary of Health and Human Services here in the United States, I remember when he said to me, you know, Amanda, I'd really like to get some young folks into the Department of Justice here in California. Like, what is going on, right? I all of a sudden start to look at our process. I have the team, my HR team, like write it out. And then I said, wait a second, am I understanding this right? The only way resumes can be submitted is to mail them in? And so immediately you're like, yeah, that entry point, big problem, right? And so there are those opportunities. And so what we do also try to do is have a couple of short wins at the very beginning to be able to say, listen, people are dropping off renewals. When they apply, you have to sometimes renew for these programs. How about sending a notification? Let's do a text notification. And all of a sudden government does that and they start to see, wait a second, we're closing these gaps. And so to the extent that we can have early wins, it's not only a trust builder, but it actually does really help with that risk aversion when you say, no, this wasn't that hard and we're not changing the entire system quite yet. So it's been a navigation, but it's fun to do those quick wins. It's fun to see it changing in real time.
Which is great, but I guess not every day is like that, and we are in extraordinary times. What would you say have been the biggest challenges for Code for America, and how have you overcome them?
Yeah, you know, just internally, the heavy weight of the responsibility of it. You know, it's really weighed on folks because our client success team, you know, they talk to clients every day, right? And there are instances where they can't help, where we bump up against policies that aren't there yet. We bump up against seeing, man, if we just did this could open it up for thousands of people. And so we have done a lot of work at Code for America on trauma-informed discussions, conversations, and what we as an organization need to do to make sure our own staff stays healthy, but also recognizing how do we help community organizations deal with what they are seeing in the pandemic as well, and how to help people at this moment. And so, so part of it is being intentional about it, being intentional about the racial justice conversations that we are having. It weighed incredibly heavy on us as we keep seeing racial injustice pop up. There's a real sense of responsibility there. And so some of this is just internally, how do we have these open discussions of the difficulty not only the world is having, but how do we have these open discussions about the difficulty that people in the organization is having while you're trying to have this heavy weight of responsibility. Your kids are running through your house. A lot of that has been real. The other piece, and I think that the part that keeps us going, is we are seeing change. We see the back end of systems. So just like we saw food stamps before, governors went, oh my gosh, my system is going to crash. We could see the 10x applications coming at us. In the same vein, we are seeing systems move in ways we've never seen before. And that part does keep us going on the day-to-day. And we try and drive that message to our partners in government who are also exhausted from trying to figure this out in a pandemic.
Yeah, it's been a real year for everyone. It's been extraordinary. And you mentioned that your funding model was largely through philanthropy, but that was changing. How do you engage with external corporations? Like, what's your relationship like with them?
Yeah, so it depends. Sometimes we can find that there is a good public-private partnership on being able to help us with our case management system, or being able to help us on some outreach efforts, tracking outreach efforts, or reaching new communities. So we do try and work with what are the organizations that are doing that are really outreaching to low-income communities and successfully doing so. Organization like Propel, who has really made their business model around that. But what I will honestly say that's really hard is we are addressing a market failure in many ways, right? The work that we are doing in low-income communities is a zero to no profit business. And for us, that means there's not a lot of partnership, public or private partnership players in that space. And so what we try and do is say, hey, we need to make some of these changes on the front end. How can you, because we're working with pretty big private sector systems, we need you to move in the direction to help us in this market failure, to really be able to close the gap, particularly changing the back end in this way or that way. That's been during this pandemic, has been a very healthy dialogue and relationship, particularly around school lunch program, where we had a real breakthrough where a lot of different vendors were saying, okay, let me try and change it. And so what we have done as Code for America is we've brought multi-states together to the vendor to say, all of these states are having the same issue. Can we move this piece or that piece in a certain way in order to unlock some of the barriers that people were facing as they were trying to get resources out? And the good news is this is really early in the process, but we are seeing a good partnership there, where we think that as we continue to expand safety net services, that we'll begin to really be able to work on that relationship so that there is a real public-private partnerships in these spaces where we're seeing government or there are market failures and the private sector will just cannot answer this question simply because they're focused on a different demographic.
Your results with the lunch program have been extraordinary. I mean, would you say that has been your biggest achievement to date?
It's funny because in many ways, some of our achievement is not seen. So we often talk at Code for America. One of the biggest examples is, so yes, in short, 619 million benefits going out across the country for kids to buy groceries. God, we needed that. I am glad we were there for it, but it's the unseen things. We worked with Louisiana on a notification process, right? So I know it might seem simple for Louisiana to send out text messages, but they hadn't done that before. And so they were doing that in the programs, and all of a sudden the pandemic hit, and the word got around at Code for America that they used the text system to be able to actually inform people on how to get state benefits. That for us was one of the biggest wins we've seen, because we knew it changed the way government operated in Louisiana. And they were able, not only did they take the risk and do it themselves, they didn't need us at all. And so those are the kinds of things that we often put up on our wall when we see that happen, right? Or when we see Michigan come to us and say, nowadays you can just automatically clear records. Like once the data's done, you can work with the court systems and you can match the data and just automatically move records. And when we get questions like that, that for us is a win, because we know some of this work, in fact, a lot of this work in this first decade has actually just been showing people what's possible. And so when it comes back to us as, hey, it's possible, how do I do it now? That is the thing that lights us up in a way that really is, because what we know is once we get governments to do it themselves, the system's done, right? We can get there. And we know that that's been the hardest piece to turn, is to really make folks comfortable with change, make folks comfortable with trusting systems, trusting technology in some cases, but also just trusting change to get to better answers.
The record clearing program has changed people's lives, hasn't it? It fundamentally is changing their possibilities. For those who maybe haven't read about it, can you explain a bit about what the situation is like in America and why that is so limiting for those who perhaps have committed even just a minor crime?
Yeah. So, first of all, this country is really grappling with mass incarceration over the last several decades, where there's been laws all across the country that have just led to particularly Black and brown communities locked up, and 70 million people with criminal records. When you think about that, it's massive. And it's sort of, for us, when we first entered this work, we knew it was a problem. And then we started asking questions like, wait a second, particularly when laws change and things that people were in jail for or who had something on their records for, laws changed around marijuana, brown cannabis, right? And all of a sudden, people still were having these criminal records trying to get jobs. And you can imagine that it harms everything from getting a job, from a rental agreement, from school programs where you can go on that, or you can go, go see your kid or go on that tour that the students are going to. It really does affect everything across the board. And what we looked at is, why doesn't it exist like other programs, like a credit history report, or when all of a sudden, talk about a bill you've paid and now it's gone, right? The criminal justice system seemed to get you in and never let you out. And so we started to look at that process pretty, extensively, and started to realize, wait a second, people get out and then they have to essentially get a lawyer to figure out how to get rid of that criminal background check so they can get a job. And it wasn't a surprise when you start to look at just the process alone, why you did have folks going back in. And part of what we did was we looked at that process and said, how do we make it easier? We first automated the form process. We first connected with lawyers. And then we actually asked the question, well, if we connect with lawyers and we do petitions, we will get to record clearance in the way that we want to get to in 120 years. And so we said, how do we speed this up? And that's where you start to go, shouldn't this just be automatic? Like so many other things are. Once you've served and you've done what you were supposed to do, it should just fall off. And that's really what we've been working on since. And it unlocks people's lives in a way that it just is and I have to say, it's not just one individual life, but these are communities who've been impacted by a justice system that has particularly target certain communities. So it's unleashing that to be able to have folks get a job, get housing, change the generational impact of mass incarceration.
And I wonder, when you talk about these types of, like, this is fundamental stuff, right? Feeding kids and giving people a chance, even if they've made a mistake somewhere along the way. Sometimes it can be difficult to bring together communities that need help and here's the tech that might help and explain how they kind of go together. How do you sort of approach that? Is it using your sort of examples of success? Often it's quite a sort of a high concept discussion, isn't it? How tech can improve people's lives, and I sometimes wonder whether we're doing enough to explain that to people.
Yeah, I mean, you are absolutely right when you talk about how do we talk about what role tech plays. And I have to say, it's incredibly important because at least in America right now, there's a real question around what tech has done, right? Whether it's good or bad. And so what we try and do is we really do try and simplify it to government should just work and technology can help do that. And I know that's really, really simplified, but what we have realized is that when we are too technical, you not only lose people, but it actually doesn't engender trust. Whether it's a simple application about how we ask questions, or whether it's talking about what we are doing in partnership with government. And so we do try and use our case studies or the work that we're out there doing, and we really try and use testimonials as well. Like, listen, we're just trying to help you through this tax process or tax form process. And I'll say this, this is a thing that has changed within our civic tech ecosystem. The partnership with community-based organizations is a really important trust measure for us, but it's also really important to learn the language that trusted organizations are using out in the community, particularly in reaching communities who really aren't trusting government in the way, in the way that they need to right now, especially as government is changing. And so the simple language is important, but it's equally important to really role model how are we treating folks as they come into learning about government. I do have to say, during the pandemic, one of the things, and again, we were all really moving quickly, but we saw that when government shows up as taxes, no one wants a part of it, right? But when government shows up as that community center or that nonprofit, people are willing to say, I'll take a look, right? When government showed up as not for food assistance, we didn't show up as, United States school nutrition program. We showed up as your school lunch program, right? With school, with the Tigers, right? And that was really important for us. We also recognize this, particularly in immigrant communities. We were involved in quite a few programs that were trying to help immigrant communities in the early stages of the pandemic. And it was incredibly important, particularly during a Trump administration, where immigrants haven't felt welcomed. It was really, really important for us to be hand in hand. And in fact, the face of our technology wasn't Code for America. The face of our technology was United We Dream, or many of the immigrant communities who have been out there, and our immigrant organizations who are trusted. And that's the part that I've come away with over the last year, is how incredibly important it is to have that trust, not only with the people, but with institutions. And slowly, one step at a time, if we can teach that technology can help government work, we believe that that will once again bring trust to these institutions that have long held in America.
Is that something you've learned through Code for America? Because obviously you were there walking the halls of power. You've had that experience. I wonder kind of what you've learned from maybe taking a sort of different perspective on how people engage with services.
Yeah, trust has always mattered, but it used to be, at least when I was, on the Hill for a decade, it always sort of, there was this quiet trust. I used to say I was on the Hill when politics was boring and nobody paid attention to it. But inherent in that was that there was this trust that things are going to work out. I don't want to know about it. Just go do it and don't mess things up. And then I was the national political director on a presidential campaign, and I got to see much closer on the ground how that trust had eroded over time. And you could see when you were talking to voters, like, oh, I don't want to have anything to do with that. But it was a different kind of, you guys are hurting and harming me. And so we are at a time now where, it is changing, and it's incumbent on us to continue to talk about the ways that government is changing, because I'd say over the last 4 years, there's been a lot that's been lost in America in terms of how people see and believe in our institutions. And so in some ways, while this view is new for me, I've known it's existed for a long time. It's just not been as intensely, surfaced in the way that it is today. And so now is a time that we have to intentionally talk about the ways we're, build back better, as President Biden would say, is a really key important aspect, because people have to know it's changing and that it is being rebuilt in a way that is different for all communities that have been harmed.
This is a conversation that all countries are having right now, because COVID has devastated our education system, our economy, our mental health. We know that we have this big rebuild to do. What kind of conversations are you guys having about what you think might be the challenges to come?
You know, we still, I mean, you're seeing it in America right now, where even something like the vaccine, where people can go and get, folks are shying away because they just don't trust it and just don't believe it. And that's particularly true in Black and Brown communities, or mostly true, actually, even more so in the Latinx community. And so what I'll say is I am hopeful. Number one, the idea that we have the most diverse government, federal leadership than we've ever had in this country is a statement that that is really important for people to see, because they can see themselves in this government. Right? Today, we're going to have an address by a president for the first time ever in American history, 2 women behind him, 1 woman of color. I actually just got the chills saying that out loud. But that's because when you see yourself in it, you begin to trust this institution. And it's even more important today because we have now openly been talking about the ways it hasn't included people. And so to see those visuals, to have a president talk about it, is the first step in all of it. But what we are doing at Code for America is we want to make sure that it's also showing up in our systems, that it's also showing up in our outcomes, that when you begin to look at measures of economic growth, that you are seeing it from all communities. And that's the part that I wake up every day going, I know right now everyone's talking about it, including the President of the United States, but is there sticking power so that we're really making change for the next generation? And this is where at Code for America, we have the opportunity not only on our systemic changes that we're making, but within our volunteer programs for advocacy, for talking about what they are seeing on the ground, and making sure to marry both of those, and having the commitment to see it through so that it's not just talked about on the dais in the House of Representatives today, but that we are talking about this 10 years from now in our communities all across the country.
Yeah, there is this kind of opportunity to build. And you talk about your volunteers, and I mean, they far outweigh your employees. What do you think attracts people? Why do people volunteer and come and help? Because it's same with the tech army. You know, they've achieved incredible things throughout this pandemic. Why do people show up?
So there is a couple. I am in awe of our volunteer network. I'm in awe of volunteers that come together and just want to solve something. I think what has become very special about our brigade network is people have the expectation that they're going to try and, as a community, solve something. They're going to do something. And I think there's an inherent beauty in the idea that with their free time, they want to figure out how to make people around them, systems, communities better, happier, healthier. We've seen it over and over again of folks coming, just doing it. And I think that not only get up and let's make sure this happens, but being like-minded with other people to say, let's try and solve this ourselves. Let's try and figure out if we can actually help in this moment. Not only is just incredibly inspiring, but there's something really special about a group of people who consistently year after year do that, whether it's, and the interesting piece is it really spans different areas all across the country. Sometimes it is mutual aid, right? Where you're figuring out how do we get resources to people. Sometimes it's, how do we make the bus system work better? Like, we can see it on the ground. Why don't we get together and see what we can do about it? Right? Some of it is people saying there's a whole group of folks who are coming out, who are coming out of prison, and how do we build a way to educate them on what services are out here? What I love is we will have these workshops where people bring their best practices. What happened today? And it's just fascinating and beautiful to see how people are changing government and changing the way it works and changing people's lives by volunteering for a couple of hours here or there. And it really is you, right? It's that, a lot of people used to talk back in the day, like, I put up that stop sign, right? Or like, I made sure that we have now a green, red, yellow light. Being able to hear and see that pride in the volunteers themselves to say, we did that. We helped seniors get vaccines. We helped them through that moment, is just really a beautiful feedback loop. But it also has spurred the way we think about, all right, you were able to do that on a hyper local level. Can we scale that? And that link to what started as volunteers coming together, turning into transforming a social safety net, that really is the magic of, I think, what a collective action can do.
How do you think your organization has adapted and changed over the course of the pandemic?
Geez, we're still in the change. I think the truth is we see ourselves as, how do we stay ahead of the change? How do we make sure that we see what's coming next? And that part, that part has been a real effort, not just internally to say, we're going to reopen up our offices. How do we do that now? There's never at Code for America, there's always it is just moving forward. And what does forward look like? And I have to say, when you're both having the discussion of what does forward look like in an office, that is high, people are moving around. It's fun. It's interesting. There's a lot of energy. And all of a sudden it's quiet. How do you recreate that kind of vibe and tone? So on the one hand, we're having a lot of internal, how do you make sure to stay forward leaning? And we have this expansion going on in terms of, we have a window of opportunity where governments, local, all the way through, at all levels, are changing what they're doing. And how do we do that at scale? How do we do it faster and do it right now? And build, by the way, systems, tone, and culture that can far outlast what we are going through right now. So there's a lot of juggling going on. But Code for America has been that juggler for a while. And so we try and, throughout this process, have a lot of grace. Right now, we're trying out no video Tuesdays and no internal meeting Thursdays, and then we mix it up. And so we do try and role model and check it out first, actually push ourselves to change and how that feels, because it does give us a sense about what we are asking governments to do, what we are asking, our volunteers to push on in their local communities. So we try and stay honest about those kinds of things and put ourselves through it as well.
But it does sound like if ears are open to change, that's an opportunity for you guys too. So how do you maximize on that? How do you kind of get in there and make sure you're the ones that are kind of advising how best to change?
It's we try and do it in partnership, right? So we talk a lot about, we are holding a big summit, May 12th and 13th. And at this summit, what gets surfaced is a lot of these lessons learned. Right? One of the big changes that we've made over the last 3 years is people said, you were doing all these things, but why aren't you sharing your best practices? And, at Code for America, we had to step back and say, we're doing a lot of things, and we can't forget that we have to communicate what's been learned in order to change the ecosystem. And so that's been a lot of what we've done, is we've built toolkits on how do you do digital outreach. One of the early things we did, we actually put out there, is how do you do research in an empathetic way during a pandemic? How do you incorporate lived experience? And so much of what we are now doing is building toolkits and really trying to share that, both in coalitions, both in conversations like this. I mean, one of the prides that we have is when we see this happen, when we see other folks mimic what Code for America is doing or try to civically engage. And as they do that, we are building more and more toolkits and best practices and really trying to get out there to say, here are some of our lessons learned, right? Make sure you don't come into government and say, I got it, here's the solution, right? Or for our volunteers, make sure that you don't restrain them and say, no, you can only do this project. Give them the agency on the ground to figure out what's needed most. Those kinds of lessons we are trying to not only share, but build toolkits when we can in an open source way, where we can say, you can use this, or the city use this, or what we saw in that state can be used in another state. And so to the extent that we've become much more of a coordinator, that's been by design, because we've had to disseminate this much faster in a world that is saying, how do you help us right now? And we can't help everybody. And so in many ways, what we're trying to do is also partner within the ecosystem to say, hey, you got this. You're in Michigan. You've been doing this work for a while. This is what, here, this might help. And so that's really helped foster a much more collaborative ecosystem. But what I'll say is a lot of the ecosystem itself, a lot more new organizations have popped up, and man, we welcome it. I love it. I love having partners in this space to try and make change.
Yeah, because I guess if you have like a global community, it's more people thinking about problems we're all having, right?
That's right. I mean, we've learned a lot from UK.gov and some of the work that they've done. We've learned a lot from just in general, seeing around the world what has worked for food assistance programs. We looked at a lot of the questions that folks are asking, particularly as we reach immigrant communities, what worked so that we could mimic that. What kind of language did you use? What kind of distribution system was really important? What community organizations, right? Sometimes it's religious, sometimes it's community-based, sometimes it's a cultural experience that communities have where you can link in. All of that we believe is incredibly important. And the only way we learn is that we have more people, in this civic tech ecosystem trying to figure out how to change it for the better.
Yeah. Now listen, we're going to give you 3 wishes here right now. And in terms of like, what would you like to see in the, the tech for good ecosystem? Like if you had all power, what would you want to happen? And I guess, not just on, an American platform, globally, like we are talking on a sort of global change.
Yeah. I'd love for tech to be that lever that really has the world see our folks who are most suffering, and right now in a way that's quite invisible. We're beginning to see it because of the pandemic, but all of those folks, communities that have often been left out, have been there for a really long time. And if tech for good can be the window or the bridge to be able to bring them, to empower them in a system all across the world, that would be pretty remarkable and really a unique role that technology can play if we want to be and can be intentional about it everywhere. When I say that, it's interesting because it's not just a tech problem, right? It's people who not only can see the leverage of tech, but who can also be there to do the old-fashioned reaching out to communities and understanding that it is our responsibility to figure out that bridge, because governments around the world are the only ones that can do it. We won't see the private sector do it. Nonprofit can do it, but not at scale. It truly is, how does technology by government get used to be able to see all people? So that's my one quite big wish. I think the other pieces are that I hope we have staying power. I think a lot of people think about tech as like you come in and you do an app and wow, that's really great. But I hope we have staying power to iterate in the way that technology does and keep refining over and over again. I think we often see systems become stagnant where policies get put into place and then it exists for what it is. Technology has a unique lesson to be taught, learned, embedded within how we do everything in life, which is how do you iterate over time? And how does technology really push that way of thinking and stay true to that as the spotlight moves off of digital delivery or digital access or Zooming like this? How does technology still play a role where it is linking people and doing good in a new and different kind of way? And then the last thing I'll say is, as we start to really tackle some of these big things in life, climate change, how does tech find their place in it as a way of really embedding the same kinds of lessons that we're learning now, which it's not just about going big, or it's not just about the cool thing we can do, but how is it that we show up as tech caring and utilizing tech in a way, or leveraging tech in a way that can really embed a deeper level of doing it in a way that sees all people. So it's not just climate, but it's climate justice for all people. And I think there's a way, a real role to play, tech for good can play in all of it. And so I hope that we see, or we look back on this moment and see how really tech changed it, but they did it in a way that actually cared about people who were forgotten and cared about people in general.
And what would your advice be for your counterparts in Scotland? You guys have been doing this for a long time. You are working across a a country that is absolutely ginormous with different legislation, and it sounds unwieldy in some respects. What would be your advice to your counterparts here in Scotland?
Stick with it. I know that's easy to say, but or it feels very simple, but Code for America has changed a lot over the last 10 years. And we've seen organizations sort of, come into the space, leave in the space, and we've evolved a lot over time. And I think that both the intention to say, we know there's a place for this. We know there's a place for our civic tech volunteers. We know there's a place for tech to actually help where markets fail. But I think the magic to that was that we kept changing and finding new ways of doing it and learning about ourselves as we did it. I think that was really important throughout the process. And then not forgetting that in a world where folks are used to just doing it, not forgetting how important the storytelling is about it, that we are not just doing apps or changing processes, but we're also winning hearts and minds and ways of thinking in a different way. And so one of the lessons learned that Code for America has learned is, man, we forgot that part. We were busy doing, and how important it is to tell not only volunteers that are joining all the impact that they've made, but to really tell a world like, listen, we have the power to actually change things in a new way. And that's invigorating for life itself. So I am just so excited that we are having we're seeing this more and more around the world, where people are coming together, utilizing their skills to do things in a new and better way. And, as we hopefully all recover from this pandemic, we really can, as a tech community globally, change the way we come out of the system. And so now more than ever is it important for civic tech folks, technologists, activists, really come together and shape what that looks like. So I am excited, in partnership with all of you, to begin to do this around the world.
You sound excited. What next for you? What's the next big goal?
We've got to, we have a real opportunity with this president to really shape a role model. What does a social safety net system really look like in America? What does it really mean to change child poverty and really change it for a generation? For us, things working should be automatic. For us, justice should be automatic. For us, equitable outcomes should be automatic. And so we are going to keep plugging away at each of our different verticals, and making sure our civic tech community is continuing to push on the edge of, whether it's the conversations today around policing reform or police reform, or what we don't even know is coming on the horizon. Perhaps it's climate change. We want to make sure that we are in that space and continuing to change the mindset of how we can do things.
Yeah, it is an exciting time. And I think it is taking that opportunity to make what's been a really difficult situation for the whole world and see if we can maybe create something better. Do you believe we can?
I do. Not only do I believe we can, I still believe in the human ability to think about a future even in really, really difficult times. And I say that empathetically because I know there are countries around the world that are going through some devastating moments right now. All of us have been through those moments as we've seen each country tackle this issue. And I hope, I really do. Part of life is trying to figure out, how do I take this moment and how do I make us better in the future for it? How do I give purpose to what we are going through right now? And I just see it over and over again, in the communities that we serve, but also just the ingenuity around the country, around the world, that we can learn from this and be better from it. Even when it's hard, I believe there are moments to come. And, I know I've said it a couple of times, but the progress, just the visual that we will see today with a president, the most powerful what we see as a powerful man leading this country, seeing two women behind him, and for the first time ever, a woman of color at a time where America was marching in the streets, is pretty remarkable day of a reminder of what can be done in darkness, that you can have progress even in the moments of darkness. And so, gosh, I am hopeful. I really am. And I wish I could give the world a hug, and I wish I could have a crystal ball and say it's going to get better, but we all have to go through this journey as we do it. And sitting here with you as tech, as a lever to do this, we can do this, and we have the power to do it. And that's really inspiring to me.
Well, those are wonderful words to conclude, Amanda. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us this morning, for you this afternoon. And we welcome back Richard.
Hello. That was, I suppose, just to restate, Laura, and also to thank yourself so much, to both Laura and Amanda. Absolutely fascinating discussion and insights there, I think, from Amanda, and thanks for leading that interview, Laura. I suppose it's that fabulous balance of stark reality and an optimistic and motivating view of what the future could and can hold. And it also struck a chord with me, Amanda, in terms of some of the surveys that I've seen with regards to technology sector trust in the US. There's a bit of a decline year on year, the need to address that. The other one that was fascinating for me recently was just the sheer time it takes to get things done. The marked difference between low income and higher income level. Everything takes longer if you have less, which is not necessarily should be the case, especially when you need more. And there's so many takeaways. I think that everyone watching this will have taken so many points. For me, I've written a list, and it would probably take me too long to go through it. But I suppose figuring out a way to solve a problem, make things better, can truly be empowering and change people's lives for the helper and those who are being helped. So I think focus on doing the right thing for all and hold the wheel, I think, would be my analogy on that in terms of your direction. So thank you so much from all of us for leading the interview, Laura. And thank you so much, Amanda. That was fantastic. And we appreciate, as Laura says, it was an early start. And hopefully we can see you over in Scotland at some point soon.
I'd love that. I look forward to seeing you all.
And I think our signal was probably confused by the Edinburgh Castle sitting next to us. So hopefully you'll be able to come over there and look at that soon. So thank you once again, and have a great day. Right, finally, we're now on to our closing remarks to take us to the finishing line of today's summit. Actually, it would probably be more appropriate to say that they're now going to take us to the start line for a second year of Tech for Good, the Scottish Tech Army, and it will be fascinating now to see what we can all achieve over the next 12 months. Pass you on to Kirsty McIntosh and Alistair Forbes. Thank you.